this. Welcome to this last of the 3 series of the Company of Charity in the Community of Earth. So as you know, it's being sponsored by the Sisters of Charity of New York and the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth. And we want to thank you, Terry, Father Terrence Moran, very much for these presentations and for inviting us more deeply into the heart of charity. So today's presentation will be shorter than the first 2 sessions to allow more time for us to share together connections we have made between the charism of charity and care for creation, or perhaps someone or we would want to share any new energy that we've gotten from these presentations, or how we feel called to bring the charism of charity into the Ecozoic era. So again, Terry, thank you very much, and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So as Carol mentioned, and as you can see on your screen, our last session is called Gifts from the Heart of Vincent, the Vincentian Virtues for an Ecozoic Age. You're probably familiar with the term Ecozoic already, but in case you're not, this is it's a term coined by the great geologian, as he called himself, earth theologian, Thomas Berry.
Right.
And he said a renewal of life in some creative context requires that a new biological period come into being, a period when humans would dwell upon the earth in a mutually enhancing manner. This new mode of being of the planet I describe as the Ecozoic era, the 4th in the succession of life eras thus far identified as the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. So as you know, as Barry mentions, for some, mainly for scientists, we're in the Cenozoic era, or we're coming to the end of it. That Cenozoic comes from 2 Greek words for new life. It was the period of the incredible explosion of a variety of life on Earth, particularly of plant life and of mammalian life, which will culminate in the mammal species to which we belong. Some people have suggested that we call this age the Anthropocene, because it's the age in which the human became dominant, in which humans began to influence the entire planetary life system in a way that no single planetary life system had been able to do for billions of years. And there are some who are suggesting we should call our era the Capitalocene, the age of the rule of capital, because frankly, it's not all humans who are responsible for the ecological devastation that we're experiencing now, but rather it is Western industrial capitalism. It's a few specific human beings and a particular way of living. But I'm going to stick with Barry's dream word that we're moving into an Ecozoic era, an era in which we have to think of the whole ecos, of the whole household of creation, rather than just the benefit of the human. It's always struck me that the Vincentian charism, the charity charism, is primarily a charism of response. I'll illustrate what I mean by that by a contrast. The Jesuits a few years ago came up with 4 apostolic priorities that all the Jesuits all over the world are supposed to orient their activity around. The number 1 apostolic priority is spreading Ignatian spirituality. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's something that's very far from the Vincentian or the charity charism. I doubt there's a single community in the Federation that has as its priority promoting charity spirituality. And the reason is because, as the slide is saying, the Vincentian charism is a charism of response. We don't come in with a prepackaged program that we want to promote, but rather we respond to needs, especially the needs of those people made poor and those people made marginalized. That's the deep meaning of those famous quotes we're familiar with from Vincent and Louise. Vincent says, that's what our rules engage us to do, to help poor persons, our lords and masters. So we don't go in as the lords and masters or the ladies and mistresses, but rather it is the people to whom we minister who set the agenda. Louise said the same thing. Above all, be very gentle and courteous to the poor. You know that they are our masters, and we must love them tenderly and respect them deeply. So the character of our charism is something that really we don't have the reins on, that we're not in the driver's seat about. It is rather those made poor and the marginalized who are in the driver's seat of our charism. So how is earth the master of the company of charity? How does earth set our agenda? Or we might put it, how are endangered species the masters of the company of charity? How do they set our agenda? Or we might put it, how are climate refugees the masters of the company of charity? How do they set our agenda? Or we may put it, how do people under food apartheid, the masters of the company of charity, how do they set our agenda? That term, food apartheid, is a new one to me, and it may be to you as well. We're probably more familiar with talking about food deserts. But the term food apartheid, a desert is a naturally occurring phenomenon. Apartheid is a managed political system where food and agriculture are deliberately not made accessible to certain groups of people. For example, people of color, low-income people, indigenous people. So how do people under food apartheid, how are they becoming the masters of the company of charity? Those of you who heard me before probably heard me mention the fact, and I find this tremendously impressive, that the first members of the company of charity, Vincent and Louise and their companions, were responding to a climate crisis. They were ministering to climate refugees because Europe during the life of Vincent and Louise was going through what was called a little ice age, which resulted in a long-term continent-wide agricultural crisis. Agricultural crises then, as now, propel people into the big cities where they think there are better prospects for work, but actually subject them to all kinds of social and spiritual and economic dislocation. So it was to those climate refugees that the company of charity first ministered. So responding to a climate crisis is nothing new for us. And of course, here on the right is a picture of a beggar in Paris at the time of Vincent. And on the left, the daughter of charity, servant of the sick, bringing her soup and her first aid basket to respond to the needs of those climate refugees. So to look at the 5 Vincentian virtues. Vincent called those 5 virtues, referring to the story of David and Goliath, he called them the 5 smooth stones by which we might conquer the evil Goliath. So I'm going to invite us today to reimagine how those virtues might empower us in the struggle against what seems like a very big Goliath, a very big giant, the struggle against climate catastrophe, against loss of biodiversity, against a culture of extraction. Those 5 virtues, simplicity, meekness or gentleness, humility, mortification, and zeal, have been formative of the family of charity right from the beginning. Unfortunately, the word virtue sounds kind of very Victorian and puritanical and old-fashioned and fusty to us at this time. So I invite us to think of the virtues in the terms of what physicists are telling us, that physicists are reminding us more and more that the division of reality into matter and energy is really an illusion. There is no such thing as a thing. Even things that we call things are really, as physicists say, energy events. That every thing that is perceptible to our senses is an energy event. So I invite us to, instead of saying virtue, let's look at these 5 things as forms of energy. They are energies of the universe with which we as humans need to align ourselves in order to enter into that Ecozoic, that life-enhancing age that Thomas Berry dreamed about. So first of all, simplicity. This doesn't mean for Vincent what we might think it means. It doesn't mean only having 2 blouses or 2 pairs of pants and not a lot of tchotchkes in your room. Vincent called simplicity my gospel. The French society of the 17th century was incredibly complex, and somebody who operated it always had to consider conflicting social and economic and political interests. French culture in the life of Vincent was a minefield to figure out where you stood in the hierarchical pecking order. And that was something that both disgusted Vincent, and it was a game that early in his life, before his conversion, he played himself. But it was also something that he had to move in, even after his conversion. So he kept simplicity as his gospel lodestar. For Vincent, simplicity was always taking the simple view of God, taking the perspective that God has on the universe. God is not a being divided by conflicting inclinations and desires and passions as we are. God is the most simple of beings. So to focus on God alone for Vincent was the meaning of simplicity. Seeing things with a God's eye view invites us to see things with the widest perspective possible. And so eco-spirituality invites us to always consider in all of our activities the well-being of the whole. Not just my well-being, not just the well-being of my species, not just the well-being of my congregation, but the well-being of the whole. Again, as Thomas Berry has said so powerfully, all human activities, professions, programs, and institutions must henceforth be judged primarily by the extent to which they inhibit, ignore, or foster a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship. So simplicity calls us to see the universe in that way, to see it as God sees it, as one interdependent, sacred community. That requires a massive shift in imagination for us because we have not been taught to imagine or to think that way. Do you all remember when you dissected frogs in high school? We thought that the best way to learn about a frog was to kill it and to slice it open and to examine its guts. Whereas in reality, to understand a frog, you have to understand the swamp it comes from. You have to understand the swamp and its bioregion. You have to understand that bioregion in the context of the whole planetary life system. So we can't kill and dissect the frogs anymore. We have to look at everything as a part, as we are, of one sacred, interdependent community. Next, the virtue of humility. Humility means living in the truth. And we have not, as human beings, lived in the truth of our place in the community of life. We're called to live in a way that recognizes we are not above creation or separate from it. And that's what's been drilled in us since we first studied the Catechism. Pope Francis in Laudato Si calls this exaggerated anthropocentrism, making the human the center rather than centering the whole ecos of which we are a part. Pope Francis says in Evangelii Gaudium I noticed that the practical relativism typical of our age is even more dangerous than doctrinal relativism. Pope Benedict, who recently died, would be appalled by that. There's something worse than doctrinal relativism, Pope Francis says.
Yeah.
When human beings place themselves at the center, they give absolute priority to immediate convenience, and all else thus becomes relative. Hence, we should not be surprised to find, in conjunction with the omnipresent technocratic paradigm and the cult of unlimited human power, the rise of a relativism which sees everything as irrelevant unless it serves one's own immediate interests. Humility calls us to leave that sense of relativism, which makes everything else irrelevant except our immediate human needs. The Vincentian virtue of meekness or gentleness, that calls us to a deep attitude of respect and welcome of the other. Now, traditionally, we would have looked at that at being meek in our relationships with other human beings. But we're called to this meekness and gentleness in our relationship with all of creation. Each creature is a word of God, an irreplaceable icon of the divine beauty. When we go for a picnic in the summer, almost right after you pull out your basket, the ants arrive. And we look at the ants as this terrible annoyance that we have to get rid of because they're ruining our picnic. We don't realize that the stuff that's in our picnic basket wouldn't be possible. Agriculture wouldn't be possible if the ants didn't aerate the soil beneath our feet.
That's true.
So how do we treat the ants with meekness and gentleness? Even the ants invite contemplation. The Sisters of Mercy, if you go to their website, have a wonderful, wonderful program on the dangers of extractivism. And they refer particularly to something that Pope Francis is talking about a lot in Africa now, how mining interests have devastated the earth and devastated the lives of people. So the extraction of minerals from the earth. But they point out that extractivism is not just something that miners do, but it's an attitude of heart and spirit. We look at everything outside of us as something that we can hollow out in order to fill our own inner emptiness. The Vincentian virtue of meekness is a powerful counter to that attitude of extractivism. Thomas Berry says, we don't need a human answer to an earth problem. We need an earth answer to an earth problem. Technology is not going to teach us how to relate to earth in a way that will stop the climate catastrophe. Only a deep listening that comes from gentleness and meekness, a deep listening to earth will do that. So the answer will come not primarily from our scientists, but from our spiritual directors, from our counselors, from the people who can teach us how to listen, how to approach other beings with gentleness and meekness.
Beautiful.
When I was looking for a graphic for each of the virtues, I found lovely ones, except for the one for mortification. Everything that came up had these medieval whips and chains and all this terrible stuff. So I'm going to suggest the names of the other Vincentian virtues translate pretty well to our times. I suggest we change mortification, which means putting to death, to the word vivification, bringing to life. The Vincentian virtue of mortification or vivification calls us to choices that foster life for ourselves and for earth. Robert Maloney, who was Superior General of the Vincentians, says that mortification means making all our choices in view of our fundamental option for the poor. Well, we might expand that and say now, mortification or vivification means staying open and vulnerable to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And as we know, if we've tried to do this, This definitely means embracing the cross. It is something that definitely stretches us, especially when we live in a world where making choices for the good of life are no easy answers. I saw somebody say the other day that solar panels are built on slavery. The batteries that are required for solar panels, for the technology that we're using to have this Zoom, require those heavy earth minerals that are the product of slave labor, often of child labor. So it's very, very hard to discern the correct choice to make. Some of you might remember a book that came out, a good while ago, 20 years ago now, by a woman named Chellis Glendeling. And the book was, My Name is Chellis, and I'm in recovery from Western civilization. She looked at our Western culture as profoundly addictive. So we all need to be in a 12-step program if we are in Western capitalist culture. That's what the Vincentian virtue of vivification calls us to. It's not empty ascetical gestures, but rather a necessary dying to any addiction in ourselves that prevents us from generous relationship with the poor and with earth. How much of our lifestyle in the developed countries, which is considered normal, is really bought on the misery of other people, on the back of the poor? Do we calculate the price that the poor pay, that earth pays for our lifestyle choices? So Vincentian vivification calls us to a life of a recovery from that addiction. Finally, the beautiful and perhaps most characteristic Vincentian virtue, the virtue of zeal. Vincent says, if love is the sun, then zeal is its ray. He very appropriately looked to the source of all energy in our solar system as the source of zeal. Zeal is definitely an energy of the universe that we don't create, that we align ourselves with. So can the company of charity embrace the ecological crises of our time with the same energy and creativity and zeal that Vincent brought to the relief of the poor in 17th century France? You're probably muted, so you can't answer this question. But do any of you know who the painter of this painting is? It's a painting from 1897 called Science and Charity. I'll ask you later when we unmute and see if anybody knew it. It is amazingly by Pablo Picasso. This was his first painting that he did when he was 15 years old.
Oh.
I showed this recently to a meeting of hospital administrators, and somebody, when they saw the painting, said, "Oh, Picasso really could paint." It doesn't look much like his more famous ones, where the daughter of charity would have the eye coming out of her shoulder rather than out of her head. But Picasso was on to something very important in terms of what we're talking about today, about what virtue is. So he has a doctor and a daughter of charity at the bedside of a sick woman. The doctor is taking the woman's pulse. His attention is on this scientific instrument, on the watch, and how it's measuring the woman's blood pressure. And that is certainly important. That's important information to bring the patient to health. But the daughter of charity knows that the woman is also going to be healed by not having to worry about whether her kids are being taken care of. So sister has the baby wrapped in her arms there. She's giving mother a cup of nourishing soup. So the woman doesn't have to worry about getting the meals together for herself or for the family. The daughter of charity is looking at the woman. She's not looking at the watch. So she knows the compassionate gaze is as important to healing as the techniques of medicine. So this is the kind of thing that the Vincentian virtues call us to, something that unites both of those things, that brings science and charity together. that can respond in a holistic way, in a full person way, to the cries of earth, to the cries of all of Earth's creatures. You're probably familiar with this original seal of the Daughters of Charity. For Vincent, the poor are not those unfortunates who are going to get a reward someday in heaven, but they are an immediate call to the Christian conscience that demands an immediate response. Louise herself designed this seal, and she used it to seal her letters. She took liberties in modifying the text of St. Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:14. Paul says the love of Christ compels us. Louise alters it to la charité de Jésus crucifié nous presse. The love, the charity of Jesus crucified compels us. That French word, verb presser, is variously translated as compels us, as urges us on, as presses us. The Vincentian vocabulary, as we know, is full of words of urgency. Zeal is a word of urgency. So do we in the company of charity have that sense of being pressed, of being compelled, of being urged on by the climate crisis, the climate catastrophe that is so evident, the crucifixion of Jesus in our day? You may have seen as well this wonderful image of Sister St. Joseph Mary Southern. She takes that iconic image of Earth from space, which is so precious and so delicate and so holy, and she violates it by putting around it the horrible instrument of torture of Jesus's passion, the crown of thorns. Like Louise, Mary Southern takes the liberty of modifying this traditional image. So like Louise, we take the liberty to adapt the words of Paul to a situation of global crisis that he was incapable of imagining. How do we make the company of charity today? The love of earth crucified compels us. How do we align ourselves in a more deeper way with those 5 energy events, those 5 virtues that will empower us to follow that compulsion, to respond in love to the call of earth crucified? So I invite us now to enter into a few moments of silence and to consider the question, what new connection have you made between the charity charism and care for creation through your participation in this series, or from your own life for that matter? What new energy do you experience through participation in this series? And to what action are you called as individuals or as groups in bringing the charism of charity into the Ecozoic era? So let's rest in silence for a few moments with those questions, and then I'll invite you to unmute yourselves and to share. Okay, I invite us now to enter into a time of sharing. And Carol, I hope you can facilitate that because I can't see the. Let's.
So you know what I did, Terry?
I'll just close my PowerPoint because.
Yeah.
And then I'll be able to see the whole screen.
Good. And for those who might not be that familiar, I typed the questions into the chat box. So
Okay, but they were also on the screen.
well, what I was thinking though is it'd be nice if we can see each other too, you know.
Yeah,
until-
yeah.
all right.
So
Okay.
okay.
Yeah. But all righty.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me just ask the group, you can thumbs up, because it is nice to see more people on the screen. Is it easier for you to have Terry put the questions up on the screen, or can you see them in the chat box?
Can see.
Okay.
And they've got the general idea. I mean,
Okay, great. Okay, so
first
Terry
of all,
and
how
I,
many people recognize the Picasso painting?
Oh,
Mary Kay,
Very
okay.
good.
did she?
Okay,
So-
so let's hear what's banging
Yeah.
around in your minds and hearts.
Just. Margaret, could you come to this? Excuse me, okay.
This all of us?
Maggie, are you trying to say something?
I just said, is this all of us is for?
No, there are 20 of us on the call, on the
Oh,
Zoom.
good, okay.
Mhm.
Gallery. Okay.
Oh, you know what, Lorraine? Someone, I have to, Lorraine had started screen sharing. Lorraine, can you try to stop your screen sharing? Press where you see stop. Okay, thank you. Yeah, just be careful. Thank you.
Brenda, do you have your hand up?
Yes,
Okay.
I was seeing something that not necessarily the series, but throughout this year, Carolyn Cromer has been saying who else and what else calls Nazareth home, and just walking upon, you know, the grounds and really becoming more and more conscious, whether it's the mushrooms and toadstools or the birds or the, you know, endangered bats and salamanders, just all of creation that, you know, a lot of times we take for granted. You admire it and you see it, but I don't know how often I kept saying, I'm sharing my home with, or they're sharing their home with me, has been something that I've been reflecting on a lot these last few months.
That's great. That's an important part of the 12-step program we should all be in.
Barbara, are you trying to say something? Because you're muted. Okay, Barbara Jasinski. Okay.
I was impressed when you said that the Vincentian charism is a charism of response. And the first thing that I thought of was, so we really have to listen, don't we? If we're going to respond appropriately, we have to start deeply listening to each other. And I'm kind of piggybacking on what you said, to the sounds of nature, to animals, to plants, to thunder, to lightning. I think as we become more conscious of this, it just wells up in you. What's my response? how do I meet such a magnificent display of God and God's wisdom? Beautiful thought. A charism of response. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And I just can't help but add to what you're saying. How do we listen to the sounds that are no more?
Yeah.
The sounds of all the species that have gone extinct in our own lifetime, in fact.
Right.
Yeah, that's so important what you said, Barbara. And that's why I said it's our spiritual directors that are going to save us, not the scientists necessarily. Because the scientists are saying, well, we'll just make a machine to suck carbon out of the air. And things can go on as normal. But as Thomas Berry said, it's not us finding solutions to an Earth problem. It's Earth showing us the solution to an Earth problem. And that's going to require a kind of listening that is not the way we've been trained, we've been educated. We're barely beginning to know how to do that. And we have to learn how to do it fast.
For me, also, that about listening to the earth calls me into a real inner looking at what happens, because it's easier to look at what the scientists are saying, or if we just do this or that, it'll decrease the carbon contamination. So it is a real, speaks deeply.
Thank you, Janet. Maggie?
I was thinking of the word kinship. Kinship will get us off our pedestal. We think we're, above everything, and if we're with it, we have a reverence with it, like our community. It's part of our community. That might sound funny at first, but not really. If we are connected to each other and to the world and to everything, to me, I see all those beautiful words like simplicity, gentleness, humility, and everything in that kinship. I see a lot of beauty in that word.
Sarah, I see you have your hand raised. Yes.
I do, yes. I can't help thinking with our connection with the Vincentian charism of being one of response of Vincent's words of do what's in front of you, and that's timeless. So we look at what's in front of us now and saying, what must be done? What can I do? What can we do? It's very Vincentian.
Taking what
Grace has her hand up. You need to unmute, Grace.
I was just thinking about the comments about listening and being in touch with all of creation. And I belong to a lay group of, a contemplative lay group of people. And the other night, one of the women was sharing that she has a daughter with special needs. And they were walking around the lake. And there was a goose that had a handicap. And she said they stopped, and her daughter began to talk to the goose, called her Mother Goose. And she said that goose just kept in contact with her daughter. It was like the two of them connected with their disabilities. And it was a moment of God's grace. And then that was a couple weeks ago. And then they went back and the geese were not there. And she said, Mother Goose is gone. And they went back again last week and the goose was there again and waddled over to her with the disability. How that child made a connection with creation by just being present. And I thought to myself, that is Vincentian too. It's just being present to all of God's creation. And when you talk about listening and being attentive to the grace of the moment, isn't that Elizabeth as well? it certainly was a grace of the moment for that child, for that goose, and for her mother.
Thanks, Chris.
And when I listen to the responses you're sharing so far, I can't help but think how that listening, the response is what you were talking about, Terry, about the contemplative gaze. That's a response, you know, the contemplative gaze, and that beautiful example of the daughter of charity in Picasso picture. You know, she had that contemplative gaze while she was also responding. And then I guess this is what I was kind of hearing as I was hearing your sharings. The love of Christ, excuse me, the love of earth crucified compels us. And to me, part of that response is, how do I sit with that contemplative gaze and let that be my response to take in the pain that I'm seeing, the pain, whether it be, and Pope Francis is just doing it beautifully in terms of some of the messages coming out of his visit in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that call to bear witness, those people bearing witness with the hurt and the pain and the suffering that they have had. That's not going to go away easily, but it's the accompaniment, it's the journey. And so I guess for me, the charity as we move forward is how do I continue to listen to the pain and not get stuck in it, but move with it. Is it Isolitis? Is that Isolitis? Is that your name? Hello, I see you have the hand raised. Yes.
Yeah. I was just thinking, we're going to, I'm a sister of Charity of Nazareth, and we are going to have our General Assembly in June for 2 weeks. And our theme is tread lightly, diversity, interiority, and communion. And I was thinking how apt that is for today's session. It just fits because, and even your poster behind you that says always connected. You know, we need that. It's diversity, it's that listening, that interiority, and then the communion with all beings. And if we tread lightly and keep that all in mind, I think we'll be in good shape. I also love that word, zeal with urgency, because sometimes it takes us a long time to make decisions and to move forward. And so I love that word, urgency and zeal.
Thank you. I am kind of struck by my own lack. Every time I listen to these wonderful conferences, I know what I'm not doing. But I'm here in Guatemala, and there is so much concentration, effort against the violence, against the injustice. I mean, you pick up any paper, even what's coming through scripture and coming through some of the religious groups speaking. I don't hear a whole lot. I know we're there. I know we're Laudato Si, but it's not, you can't hear it. I can't hear it. And I just sitting here, and what do I hear more of? I hear more of the struggle, and it's all connected, of course, the mining and all the other things, the migration. So I'm just wondering to myself, the majority of sisters here in Guatemala are daughters of charity. They outnumber all the religious sisters by an incredible amount, and they're wonderful women, I know them, but I'm wondering what we need to do to stir up in this kind of awareness more, not that we forget the other, because that's not going away, but I do think that we need to relate the two together. They are related.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pope Francis makes that point again and again, that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one cry. And no effective solution is going to come from ignoring either of them.
Right.
One of the blind spots of the Vincentian charism, if we want to put it that way, is that we're very good at the focus on what's right under our nose, what's immediate, as Grace was saying. It's harder when you're knocking yourself out, meeting all these immediate needs. It's hard to look at the big picture and see the big picture connection to the person who's right in front of your nose. So certainly Pope Francis is calling us to do both of those things. So light a fire under the daughters.
You know, Ginny, just
Not just the daughters, I just want to say that light of.
Okay, everybody. And it's hard because, as I said, when there are so many pressing immediate
Yeah,
needs right in
right.
front of you, you know, to look at something that looks like an abstract, you know, science lesson. So making those connections is very, very important.
But, and I know Ginny and I, we've had conversations, but I just want to kind of hold up that what is happening is, it'll be interesting to see out of the Synod, because those, what they call intercontinental dialogues and conversations, there is that call to be much more involved, especially with the people on the margins. And then the sisters advocating globally, much more talk about us coming together and joining together. And so that what's happening in Africa regarding the extraction problems is connected to what's happening here on our Indian Native American reservations, is what's happening with the people, the human rights defenders being killed all over the world recently. You know, what is it? I forget, Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras. Yeah. So so the thing is, sometimes it's happening. Unfortunately, it's not, doesn't make the head news the way some of the more negative things do, you know.
You know,
I'd like to recommend again that program the Sisters of Mercy have on extractivism. Just put in Sisters of Mercy and extractivism in Google and it'll come up. And it's also available in Spanish. It's a wonderful compilation of readings and videos that does both of those things that you're talking about, Jim. Responding to the immediate needs of those people who are going down to the mines, for example, and looking at the bigger, the spirituality of extractivism that has ruined so many countries in Central America and South America. So I recommend that to all of you. It's well worth your time. Get a group of people together to study it.
What's the title again?
I don't remember the exact title, but if you Google Sisters of Mercy and extractivism, it'll come up.
no,
Actually, I'll try to find it right now and put it in the chat.
Okay.
But keep sharing.
yeah, Chris, I was very also very impressed by your definition of humility, to live in the truth. And we just look at our civilization, our own country, and you know, you can hear Christ say, Paul Pilate saying, "What is the truth?" And I think when you look at a flower, a leaf, an animal, there's no deception. It is what it is. It's showing itself to you in its bare humanness, or if you're not humanness, but plantness or animalness, and to really appreciate the truth of that, and to stand in truth is to me such a beautiful place to stand. And we need so much of that, even in my prayer, to stand before God in truth, you know, like Jesus does, you know, hands outstretched and hiding nothing. Just here I am, Lord. This is truth. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Beautiful, Barbara. Thank you. I put the link to the Mercies program in the chat. It's called Awakening a New Consciousness, Extractivism. So if you go to that link, it'll take you to a world of wonderful information.
So as we conclude this series, this is the third. You know, we've had 3 wonderful sessions, thanks to Terry. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have Terry's email address, you have my email address. One of the things that I'd like us, invite us to think of is how might we go a little bit deeper or continue to go deeper? Just, you know, maybe not right away, who knows, 6 months from now, whatever. What ideas kind of surface for you? What are the needs so that we can continue to explore together and go deeper into that energy of the earth? That's also the charism of love, love's energy. So if someone has any thoughts now in the next few minutes, you know, please share. But I would just encourage us to think and pray and reflect on these 3 series, and they are up on YouTube, thanks to Terry. And I'll send out again the links to the groups I've sent it out to, and Terry sends it out to his group. So you should be getting the recordings to all 3 again. But any thoughts on for us to just ponder together while we see next steps?
I'd like to say something. I don't know if I'm muted or not.
Oh, Betty Ann, no, we can hear you.
We can
Thank
hear
you.
you.
Betty
Okay.
Ann,
Yeah.
member of ROAR, thank you. And
Yeah.
Dominican-
I just wanted to thank you all for this reflection, because coming from a Dominican background, I also have a big steeping in Vincent's spirituality and all, because I went to grade school for 8 years in Denver with Sisters of Loretto teaching us, but we learned about Vincent. And later on, I joined our Dominican community, and I went to St. Vincent's Hospital School of Nursing. So it felt like I was tracking Vincent in different kind of ways. And then in talk with my brother and sister-in-law, they created the Colorado Vincentian Volunteers, and they did it for 25 years and just retired recently, but they were here to visit. And they're just steeped in the spirituality of Vincent. And my sister-in-law is on the leadership team of the Vincentian International. So she goes to different countries with them, you know. But there's such solidly beautiful people because of their connections with Vincent and his spirituality and all. And but I also wanted to say, since we're talking about the environment and the earth and all, which I have a big heart for too. Years ago, I guess, I don't know, 25 years ago or so, I helped to co-found Earthlinks in Denver. And we took homeless people out on nature trips to visit places that they couldn't get to. And I was on sabbatical, I should say, up in Minnesota, and had a lot of input. I already had a bunch with, what's his name? Ryan Swim and the main guy, I forget his name.
Thomas Berry.
Yeah. And so, I mean, just, it's been pouring over me, and I didn't realize all the connections till I just listened to this now. But so we started Earthlinks, and what we did was we took homeless people and all to day trips in nature. But I had called my brother when I was in Minnesota, because he was working with the homeless in Denver at the time. And I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, because I said, the weather's not good in New York. You can't depend on it. But in Colorado, you always know, you can see it, the weather coming over the mountains. And he said, I think they'd love it. So when I was moving there after I was on sabbatical, but I had to get a couple of jobs in order to maintain myself until I figured out how to do this. And I had a friend who was a Sister of Loretto, and I met her at some activist things in the area. And we started talking, and we decided to start this together. And but just to see all the influences, you know, between the Lorettos and Vincent himself and the charity model, you know, it's just fantastic. And then well, I don't know, I could go on, but I don't want to hold you up, but we started, our foundress, Mary Walsh, always said she wanted the poor to have what the rich could afford. And so I saw this stuff with Thomas Berry and everything. It was so fantastic, but they couldn't afford to go anyplace. They didn't have a bed to sleep on or whatever. So I said, well, I asked Bill if he thought this would work. And he said, absolutely. They're just dying for something to do. So we started, and I asked him first, I met with a little group of them, and I said, if you were going on a picnic, what would you like to eat? And they said, no sandwiches. We're sick of day-old sandwiches. And I said, I didn't ask you what you don't want. I asked you what you want. And they said, oh, fried chicken, potato salad, soda, got to have soda, chips, maybe we could have chips. Oh, and yeah, we need cookies too. I said, okay, that sounds like a plan. Do you want to go next week? We'll be here at such and such a time. You're kidding. To the mountains? Yeah. So we took them to the mountains, and it was the beginning of years of work with people from all different kind of organizations to open their hearts to see what's really there. And we used to say, if you see a bear, don't run. Just stop where you are, pay attention to the bear, look big. And they say, well, one time we were standing there getting ready for the picnic, and these guys came
Betty
running
Ann-
down the hill.
Betty, and just thank you for, could you just kind of,
Yeah,
and
I'll
that
just
shortly,
nip it
yes.
off. But anyway, they came running down the hill, and I said, do you remember what the sign said and what we talked about? Don't run from a bear. Get together and make yourselves look big. You know, so I'm just thinking charity is at home, you know, trying to help people to pay attention. That's my mantra, pay attention. So
So,
thanks for listening.
Betty, and just to
Yeah.
say, tremendous program, was a great program, but you're reminding us, and you do it up at Mariondale, the center at Mariondale, how important it is to get outside, not just for ourselves, to make the connection with friends, colleagues, and our younger people. Yes, thanks a lot, Betty, Ann, for sharing that. Ginny, and then I
Just-
think we're gonna have
Yeah,
to close.
just let me,
Yes.
may I be bold enough, and it is bold, and I'll say it, and then I have to get to work. I would love, we don't have this. Any Zooms I have are from the rest of the world, not from Guatemala. So I'm going to be bold enough to say that I will take the call that I'm hearing, and I know I know the daughters, I know the head of it. She works in my group. So I would really love, of course, Terry, we would love to invite you. We have translations. So, and I work.
I speak Spanish.
Better if it's direct. Yeah, of course you speak Spanish. I've heard you. So I am going to get, I'm just going to say, I would like to follow through myself with the sisters that are running the programs of Confregua and Confrequi, because I think they would be great interest, and we need it. There's never been anything, at least for the last couple of years, on this thing.
Wonderful.
So thank you. Terry and I will get together, but please share if you have ideas. And Ginny, thanks for taking that initiative to the next step. And maybe we'll have some other ideas of how we can take this, move this forward. Terry, thank you very much, because again, it's how do we bring the charism of charity into this Ecozoic era so that it truly will be an Ecozoic era. You know, that's the choice between, you know, before us. Will we really, through our actions, make it an Ecozoic era, or will it be, as it seems to be going, more a technocratic or technological era? So we need to really make this the mutually enhancing relationship between Earth and humans. We have to grow into that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol. And thanks to all of
Thank
you.
you.
It's really been a pleasure. And,
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
a lot of fun.
And thank you, dear translators. Thank you
Yes,
very much.
indeed. You did a great job.
Thank you for everything. It was beautiful. Just to reflect together.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Okay,
So
bye-bye.
Terry, all I
Bye-bye.
can say is thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
very
Leah. Thank
generous.
you, Juan Joe,
Hey,
thank you.
Carol.
Yes.
Mhm.